Thank you so much, Sarah. Please, for everybody who is joining us online and on Crowdcast, give a big round of applause for Sarah Gorak. It is really extraordinary to have the honor to showcase Cincinnati's talent. And I gotta tell you, there are a few things that are better than hearing such beautiful artistry as the sun is setting on the Mercantile Library. So thank you so much, so beautiful. So we're all here, and today marks yet another momentous milestone for a lot of us, but including Urban Consulate, as we mark our first audience in-person, indoor salon since 2020. It's been 18 months, and we find ourselves back here at the, you can clap for that, that's a big deal. For those of you who are in the audience, we're super excited to have you here with us as well. Joining us in Cincinnati in the beautiful Mercantile Library. And this is our home. This is where we started, and this is where we'll continue to have these dialogues. And we've got some incredible panelists and experts and local leaders who will help us dig into an incredible topic tonight. I will just once again reiterate, you can't see it now, but just beyond my vision here are stacks and stacks of beautiful books. And so for those of you who have never been to the Mercantile Library, you have to add this place to your must-visit list. You can come here, have a nice relaxing day, read, chill. I think they even do co-working here. It's a must-visit. I always love spending a lot of time here. Before I introduce our wonderful guests this evening, I first want to acknowledge something very important. And that is that the land that our city of Cincinnati now rests is that of usurped and stolen land. And it is now our practice to do a land acknowledgement so that the remembrance of the land that was cultivated, stewarded by indigenous peoples is always remembered and always kept front of mind. And with that, want to acknowledge that this land that we now occupy is that stolen from many indigenous peoples, including the Hopewell tribe, Adena, Miamia, Shawnee, and the Osage people. Once again, it's a sobering recognition that the violence and genocide and massacres inflicted on indigenous people took away and stripped their indigenous lands. And to this day, indigenous peoples who continue to live on their land are some of the most isolated from resources that we all avail ourselves to. The deliberate and systemic destruction of their communities and culture has enduring impacts to this day. And we want to honor the people who, once again, occupy this land to this day and have always occupied this land. So let's just hold a moment of silence and recognition of indigenous peoples. Thank you. Now, I would like to introduce a very, very special person to the world, to Cincinnati, to Urban Consulate, and to, I'm sure, scores of other people and places and institutions and everything. You are a true light on the world. Please welcome Ms. Catherine Gardette. So when I think of you, Catherine, I think of how you describe yourself as an artist, as a Renaissance woman, as a civic leader. You are a beacon of light in this community. And I just want to share that, a lot of people here and in the audience might wonder, well, how does Urban Consulate create their topics? And want to share that Catherine has been one of the many thought partners that has helped us cultivate the topic that we're going to hear about tonight. So Catherine, I wonder if you might share a few words to ground us in the larger meaning of affordable for whom and the topic of housing affordability to you.
Well, let me know if you can hear me here with this, if we're good. Thank you. So affordable for whom? If you've been in a Walnut Hills meeting, a city meeting, and we're talking about development and the cost of the housing or that development, I will always ask, affordable for whom? Because if we don't know who it's affordable for, it's very difficult for us to decide what we're going to build, how we're going to build, and why we're going to build. And as we look at our city today, not just Cincinnati, but many cities around the world, affordable for whom is a very important question. Because as you will hear from the panelists this evening, they are on the ground on a regular basis making sure that those that are living at the 30 to 60% affordable monthly income are included in that conversation of affordable for whom. Cities like Cincinnati need to ground themselves in also answering the question of affordable for whom in that middle class market. Because if we continue to have women like this advocate for 30 to 60 and tax abatements and tips go to affordable housing for those that are in the upper middle class to the 1%, then it is the missing middle that is going to be left behind. So the question of affordable for whom is extremely important as we live in our cities and we grow. And I look forward to this conversation because it is so important.
Oh. Yes, words spoken with truth and words spoken with absolute passion and ardor. And I'm so excited to introduce three phenomenal guests who are going to be Sherpa-ing us through this conversation this evening. And wait, there is one more piece of housekeeping. I'm sorry, before we dive in. This is another momentous occasion for Urban Consulate because we are embarking upon a little bit of an experiment. So we are joined by members live in the audience. But what we learned from the pandemic was that there were folks joining Urban Consulate conversations from the world over. We had folks joining us in California, in Western Africa, from France, right? And so what we realized is that we wanted to continue to cultivate those who were interested in what was happening in Cincinnati. And so it made sense to us to continue to do a hybrid salon. So we've got folks joining us online and here. So just want to thank you for your patience as we work out the technical difficulties, if they do occur, to make this evening unfold as they would for any other salon. So want to thank you for that. And now, without further ado, I want to tell you a little bit about the incredible experts and local leaders that we have on the stage today. I want to first start directly to my right, Rachel Hastings, and I want to read your bio because just get ready. Everybody's bio's fire. Just give me a second. Rachel Hastings serves as Price Hill Will's Executive Director, leading staff, volunteers, and partners in collaborative efforts to improve the quality of life in Price Hill neighborhoods. Since joining Price Hill in August 2018, Rachel has managed the $10 million, you hear that? $10 million transformation of the Price Hill Masonic Lodge into Arco. If you have not been there, it is glorious. I hope you can tell us a little bit more about it today. It's a space for arts and community, as well as leading equitable commercial corridor redevelopment and expanding Price Hill Will's homesteading program, which we'll learn about a little later today, to make home ownership affordable for very, very low-income families. Before her time at Price Hill Will, Rachel worked at the Center for Great Neighborhoods of Covington for 22 years, utilizing community engagement, creative placemaking, leadership development, and real estate development to spark community improvements. Rachel has a Bachelor of Philosophy in Interdisciplinary Studies and Environmental Ethics from Miami University and a Master of Community Planning from the University of Cincinnati. Go Bearcats! Rachel hails from Chicago, though she's called the Cincinnati area home since 1990. Welcome, welcome, Rachel. I want to now welcome Janiece Jones. Janiece Jones became the executive director at Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Greater Cincinnati, otherwise known as HOME, H-O-M-E, on July 1st, 2015. HOME's mission is to eliminate unlawful discrimination in housing in the Greater Cincinnati area. HOME advocates and enforces housing regulations for all protected classes and promotes stable, integrated communities. Before joining HOME, Janiece was CEO at Community Shares of Greater Cincinnati, a community fund focused on bringing awareness and fundraising to local community organizations working on social justice, economic justice, and environmental issues. Prior to that, Ms. Jones worked as an Ohio attorney dealing with civil matters. As a real estate attorney, she is familiar with residential and commercial real estate transactions, having served as a plaintiff's counsel for hundreds of cases in the 88 Ohio counties. She understands the ongoing issues with the residential real estate market. Janiece is on the board of directors for the Cincinnati Affordable Housing Advocates Group and is working on bringing a housing trust fund to the Cincinnati market. Oh, yes. That's exciting. We want to hear a little bit about that, too. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from West Virginia University, a master's degree in public administration from Northern Kentucky University. Get ready, y'all. And a Juris Doctor in law from the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University. Welcome, Janiece. And welcome Mona Jenkins. Mona is Director of Development, fundraising. Director of Development at the and Operations at the Greater Cincinnati Homeless Coalition, whose mission is ending homelessness in Cincinnati. Mona studied at the University of Cincinnati in educational studies with a focus in foundations of education and social change. As a graduate researcher, Mona focused primarily on community-based issues in health, gender, and education, and actively worked with community members to find sustainable solutions specific to each neighborhood. Mona has also been advocating to address food access in communities that are considered food deserts. In addition to her academic and advocacy work, Mona is an active volunteer and enjoys spending time on projects that are designed to build community engagement and empowerment. This includes building houses, playgrounds, and clean water systems, teaching and after-school programs, and coordinating other volunteers to assist with various community concerns. Mona also serves as the founding board member of the Erica J. Holloman Foundation for the awareness of triple-negative breast cancer, the Cincinnati Health Network, and the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. Whew. Welcome, Mona. So we have no shortage of expertise and brilliance and community engagement and activism on the community, on the stage today. But I want to start with asking a question of each of you. So we're gathered to talk about a super complex topic with all these little intersecting, not little, big intersecting aspects, right? Why are each of you here tonight, and why is this topic important to you? I want to start with you, Mona.
For me, it's a matter of life and death for our brothers and sisters. I consider everyone in the community my brother and sister. It is my responsibility to take care of others. Grew up in a household where we don't just think about ourselves, but everyone who lived on the streets with us, right? So I wasn't only disciplined by my grandparents, it was everyone on the street will discipline me too, right? And so even today, I have that sense of it's my responsibility to care for others. And that's primarily the reason why I'm here. Housing is such, it's a human right. And we cannot live without food. We cannot live without housing. And we can't think about that next level of needs, which may be, needing medical attention or needing employment until that need is met, that housing need is met. So I wanted to be here to have a conversation about what can we do to ensure that our brothers and sisters have housing here in Cincinnati.
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for the Urban Consulate for convening such an important topic in such a beautiful space. I mean, I'm sitting here just falling in love with this space. I may drift off and wander over and look at some of those books. But for me, it is, again, coming back to, what are the fundamentals of, basic human life? Food, shelter, clothing. Those are the topics that we hear again and again. And we have a right to housing. And rights don't come from City Hall. Rights don't come from, the county. Rights don't come from corporations. Rights come from our Creator. And so anything that impedes that right, that gets in between what we have and what our Creator intended to have, is something that fuels your heart. It keeps you going. It keeps you focused. It keeps you motivated. And it makes you see yourself, because we're all created equal. You see yourself in folks who are struggling with housing, who don't have, who are at the end of their rope, who are putting up with a predatory landlord wanting sexual favors because they know they can barely afford the housing, who's worried about having their kids sleep in a car tonight. Those things are the things I think that keep us motivated and centered and driven around this work.
Thanks. So, obviously I wanted to echo what both Mona and Janiece said, and that housing is a human right. It is not a privilege. And on top of that, I firmly believe that everybody deserves quality housing in a place that they want to live. So it's not just about a roof over your head, although that's very important, but it's about being in a neighborhood that you feel safe in, that you want to raise your kids in, that you know neighbors, that you have a support network. It's about all of those things together. When folks have housing insecurity, or they're concerned about where their next meal is going to come from, or if they can make sure that there's not a roof leak or something like that, it affects every aspect of their life. I think one thing we've really noticed over the last year and a half with COVID is that it's shown us exacerbated, I should say, the inequities in housing. Easy for me to say. And that it's really hard. Folks that are living in apartment complexes, things like that, where there's not adequate maintenance, have struggled more with COVID than folks that live in single-family houses. I think there's an opportunity for us as a community now that it does seem like more and more folks are aware of affordable housing issues in greater Cincinnati. It does seem like we have an opportunity to continue this conversation, bring more folks on board to the conversation, educate ourselves together, and hopefully make a long-term change in this community that will inspire folks in other communities as well.
All really compelling reasons to be here. Thank you. And I'm hearing a variation on a theme that is an irrevocable right. Housing is something everybody is entitled to, and that is one of many entitlements given by our Creator. Thank you so much for reminding us of that. It's a fundamental right. So there's so many ways to cruise into this conversation, but I want to start with you, Rachel, because I want to get us into a space of the active work happening here in our city as countervailing, fighting forces against any kind of housing inequity. And so I have the absolute pleasure of serving on the board, full disclosure and transparency, of Price Hill Will, which is one of the most extraordinary CDCs in Cincinnati. And being led by Rachel has brought incredible leadership, not only to creating a unified Price Hill, where Lower Price Hill, East and West become one integrated whole, but one where it's a thriving community. And having been a resident of Price Hill myself, and a member of the Eco Village, it's a magical place to be. So I want to ask you, one aspect of just one strand of Price Hill Will's work centers on homesteading. And I want to ask you to share with folks here and online, what is that program's chief aim, and what do you see for the future of homesteading at Price Hill Will?
So thank you, Naima. So we created this homesteading program about 5 years ago to help families become homeowners that were left out of the system. I think most of us know, I hope that you know, that the mortgage lending system is broken. Many folks that would be able to make a mortgage payment are not able to because they don't qualify for a loan because their credit is not good enough, they don't have an American credit score, maybe somebody had health issues years ago of a bankruptcy. It's also hard to get a mortgage that's too low. If you're trying to buy a house under $75,000, it's very hard to get a mortgage loan. And we also know that folks get discriminated against based on the race and the color of their skin. So there's lots and lots of things broken with that system. The history of redlining, of course, continues to this day. So we decided that for our organization and our neighborhoods, it was important that we wanted to make sure that lower income people, and particularly people of color, got to stay in Price Hill as the neighborhoods were, slowly improving over time. It's often the role of a CDC to ensure that the things that the market doesn't touch will be worked on. So we created this homesteading program where it's a lot of complicated details, but overall, we work with the Santa Maria Community Services and Catholic Charities. They actually qualify families. Families do not need to have a credit score or any kind of credit check or anything like that. They work with Santa Maria to do some housing counseling and make sure that they can maintain a budget. The families are below 65% of area median income, which is not typically folks that are buying houses in this country. And then we match those families with the house. We buy vacant houses or get them donated to us, bring them up so that they meet building codes, so they have new mechanicals and a new roof. And then we match the family with the house. And the family has a scope of work that they agree to work on in the house. It's primarily cosmetic work like painting some bedrooms, maybe some landscaping, those kind of things. Not the mechanicals or the structure of the house, but more cosmetic kinds of things. The family agrees to make land contract payments to us over 5 years. We have a land contract that Legal Aid wrote, so Janiece would be happy. It's a good legal land contract. It's not something fishy. It's real. And the family makes payments to us over 5 years at 0% interest. We make sure that the family's payment is no more than 25% of their income, so that they have money to do other things, to make repairs, to do improvements, to pay for school supplies. Over those 5 years, the family makes payments to us, and then they also work on their scope of work. We do inspections. We make sure that utility bills, duplicates are sent to us. So there's a lot of very intense hand-holding for that 5-year period. At the end of 5 years, if the family has made those payments and completed their scope of work, we transfer ownership of that house to them outright. And they can live there as long as they want. They can do whatever they want to with it. There's no restrictions. So this program is very intentionally designed to promote affordability for families, but not on a long-term basis. This is very much an equity building program for these families. Equity in homeownership is the number one way that Americans save money to send your kids to college, to send your kids to trade school, to retire. And we have lots and lots of folks in our communities that are left out of that opportunity. If you look across the country, 73% of white families are homeowners, 48% of Latinx families, and 42% of Black families. So there's an incredible disparity there. So homesteading is our way to try to solve that problem on a small scale in Price Hill. So far, we have 15 families in the program. Of those 15 families, 7 are Black, 7 are Latinx, and 1 is white. That's a very different demographic than the folks that are buying houses through the conditional mortgage market. So we just decided that the mortgage market is not working, and so we're going to create our own system that works for our families in our neighborhood. The other thing I think that is so exciting to me about the homesteading program is seeing the families really take a lot of ownership in their properties and do so much more work beyond the scope of work that we originally agree upon. You know, for many folks, this is the first time that they've had a chance to, you know, paint a room or to replace a vanity or anything like that. Folks were finishing, like last year during COVID, folks were finishing basements and finishing attics and all kinds of things as kids were schooling from home. So it's an amazing opportunity for folks to have agency over their housing and the future of their lives. I'll give you one example of one of our first families. We have 2 families that paid off their land contract early. They were super, super motivated. One of our families bought their house for $16,000 from us. This was a house we got donated and put a ton of work into, so got a lot of donated labor, I should say. After we sold the house, they paid their land contract off in 2 years, have continued to work on their house. We had a local real estate agent do what's called a broker's price opinion, where they come in and tell you, like, if I had to list this house, this is what I would list it for. And this house, he said he would list it for $106,000. So this family has very quickly built equity, and that's equity that they can use to improve their lives, and, you know, while they're staying in the house. And so to me, that's changing that family's trajectory and also helping the neighborhood. So, you know, while it's a small program, and, you know, in Price Hill, we're continuing to try to talk to other folks, and we've talked to folks all over the state to try to encourage them to think about this program as a model. You know, we've been doing it for a couple years. We've learned some things along the way. We'd love to share what we've learned and encourage other folks to take on something like this as well.
So, so there's so much to celebrate with that, and what occurred to me is exactly what you said at the end, which was this is a scalable model if there were the political will to do so. Really, really extraordinary work. So I want to shift a little bit, because we're talking under a larger topic of housing affordability. However, we can't even get beyond a question of housing affordability if people are unhoused, right? And so, Mona, I want to talk a little bit about the trenchant unhousing epidemic that we're facing in this nation. In Cincinnati, if we want to be super, super, super responsive to a crisis that has unfolded not out of a vacuum, but as a result of decades, centuries even, long lineages of isolation from resources. Can you walk us through the work that the organization that you're with is doing? The Cincinnati Homeless Coalition. Thank you. I can get that out. Is working to end homelessness in our city, and what does the future look like to you through the lens of your work?
Sure. So I always like to say that I am working to get fired. And when every single person has safe and affordable housing, there's no need for me at all. And I don't mind that. That's my goal. And what we do at the Homeless Coalition is we support, one, the agencies who are doing the work to support folks who are experiencing homelessness or on the verge of losing their home. Back in the 80s, shelters came about as a temporary solution to folks who were unhoused, right? So they were built for the sake of having a temporary place to be, to then transition into an apartment or a home. And as years went by, economics, additional redlining, that gap has widened, and for various reasons. One of the biggest reasons here in Cincinnati is the fact that we have a shortage of affordable housing. So we can have so many units, but if someone cannot afford it, if the wages that they are making it's not enough for them to afford an apartment, then they may be living out on the streets. They may be living in their cars. They may be living with other relatives. And sometimes those circumstances are unsafe. So this is why we fight so hard to ensure that while the city of Cincinnati is short 40,000 units, it could have been worse. Probably double or triple if our agency, along with our member agencies and individuals, weren't working collectively to address the issue. In most recent years, there has been an affordable housing trust fund that has been built, and we have asked the city, let's put some money into it so that we can make sure that there are more units that are available that people can afford. So we help our agencies, but we also help individuals, and immediate needs, right, is housing. So what we're seeing is a trend, especially because of the pandemic, we're seeing that folks are losing their housing, again, because they can't afford it, unsafe conditions. They've lost their job. And so with that loss of income, you're unable to pay rent. You're unable to find another job because right now places weren't hiring because they may be shut down. And it's this safety net, this social safety net that's holding many folks together. Those strings were just cut from up under them. And so we try to help folks get back into some sort of safe environment. Entire buildings of tenants are being put out. Entire buildings, because the trend now is to remodel that particular unit, and if that unit had 1 bedrooms that were going for $600, they're now starting off at $800 to $1,000, and the size is much smaller. So I don't know if you've seen that around the city, there's been a lot of storage units popping up. That's because a lot of folks can't, the units are so small, they're having to, which is another expense, use some sort of supplemental place to store some of their belongings. So there are some things that we see, and then there are those things that are behind the scenes that we don't even pay attention to. And so we also try to educate the community about, here's what's happening, here are the reasons why. We try to dispel myths. A lot of times folks assume that people are experiencing homelessness due to their own individual fault. They are using substance abuse or mental health issues.
Yeah.
And a lot of times those things don't even pop up until someone has suffered a traumatic event, such as losing housing.
Yes,
Or someone's just too lazy and doesn't want to work.
right.
60% of the people who are experiencing homelessness have some sort of job, whether it be part-time or full-time.
Yeah. It's extraordinary to even consider that there's probably, I mean, I can speak personally of what it's like to be connected to someone in your workplace, in your family, in your home, who's sleeping in their van. You know, people who are working full-time jobs and working really hard and isolated from resources that might otherwise have them housed. So really, truly, so many people that we may not even know we're experiencing and don't know about resources like Cincinnati Homeless Coalition. Thank you for sharing that. Janiece, this next question is for you. So within the affordable housing conversation is a conversation about just treatment. And we don't often talk about the cycles of abuse that tenants endure from their landlords. Can you talk a little bit about how home is disrupting that and bringing to justice those who would abuse vulnerable people?
Yes, of course. So one of the things I think that's critical to say, that are connected, that are very, very similar, but also distinct and different, is the connection between fair and affordable housing. So affordable housing is, people being able to find a place that they can afford, quality, where they want to live. The fair housing aspect of it comes into play when there's a lack, one way is when there's a lack of that affordable housing. So you have immediately set up, you've set the table, you've set the chessboard, you've laid out the tools, with one side of the equation being very much off balance. And so that gives rise to a lot of predatory, exploitive behavior that violates the Fair Housing Act. So when folks call home, they don't say, my fair housing rights are being violated, Section 2, subparagraph 4. They say, I'm being treated unfairly in my housing. And so it's the role of our organization to say, okay, what's going on? Okay, well then what happened? Okay, well then what did you do? To get the story. And sometimes people call us with a conditions issue, a rent raise, they're raising the rent, the condition issue. And when we dig a little deeper, we come to find out, well, the rent's being raised because somebody said the kids are making too much noise. Or the unit's not being fixed because, the property manager made a pass at the tenant and she rebuffed it. Or, so she's moved to the bottom of the list. Or the person who needs a reasonable accommodation modification because they're disabled isn't getting that done because the property manager goes, well, I just think maybe you'd be happier in another unit. You'd be more satisfied if you lived somewhere else. Don't you want to live closer to family that can help you out? All those types of issues and things that kind of come up through that conversation is illegal. It's unlawful. It's discriminatory. And when we started in the late 60s after MLK's assassination, it was very overt. I went back and looked a couple years ago at some of the cases, and it was just like, no blacks, written out, no blacks, very overt, very, systemic. Over time, it's gotten more covert. We hear individuals that come to us and have their application to rent there denied with a smile. Oh, I just rented. Oh, you just got in here a little earlier. And so when you come into a housing market, like Mona described, that's already crunched around affordability, and you further constrict it with these illegal practices, you have the cases that we see. And but for more access to affordable units, that would even the playing field with some of these discriminatory practices. So if you know that I'm going to do this, I'm not going to fix anything in here, your kids are too noisy, they're making a mess, they're tearing up in here, and I know you can't afford to move. So keep them kids quiet. I don't want to hear them again. I don't want them playing in the front yard. I don't want them riding their bicycles in the hall, which is all illegal discrimination based on familial status. Or, I know you don't have money for rent. Maybe we can work something out. Home has brought federal cases against landlords that have had that tact towards their female tenants. And it wasn't just one, it wasn't just two, there were 10, 12, and these are just the women who came forward. And all of them had the same story. They'd been evicted, they had something on the record, they had another barrier to affordable housing, and the predator swooped in and knew that I know what the housing market is around here. I know how quick it is to get an eviction. Things are going to go my way because I know you have limited choices. That's why we need affordable housing and all the other issues that were talked about, and all the other issues that are raised. But that's how it shows up in our office.
Yeah, and it's heartrending to hear of the abuse and the inhumane treatment that mostly, I imagine, women, probably women of color, are experiencing at the hands of predatory landlords. And what you've also given rise to is this notion that inequity breeds inequity. So it's just layers and layers heaped on. That's what keeps us entrenched. So again, like in my mind, there is this sort of larger, all-encompassing issue that has to do with like the historical context of how we got here. Rachel, you talked about redlining, right? It seems to me like the larger economic context is like, look, it's one thing to advocate for affordable housing. It's another thing altogether to advocate that we just pay people more, right? Like the fact that our society does rely, like our capitalist society relies on an undercompensated class to thrive. Can you just speak to the larger issue of the coalitions that we might build with fair wage advocates so that folks in the workplace can actually have a wage, so this conversation might be moot? Can you talk about what those powerful coalitions might look like with different but linked issues of inequity? Rachel.
Well, I mean, that's such a great point. I mean, is it a wage issue? Is it a housing issue? It's all of the above, right? I mean, I think we have seen that this during COVID. A lot of folks who lost jobs because of COVID, have made more money on unemployment, which is terrible, right? I mean, it's a terrible sort of statement of the way we live in this country, that some folks make more money, and they're treated terribly in a lot of those jobs where they were working and are still working. So I think it needs to be a coalition of not only like nonprofits like ourselves, but also like, businesses, like chambers of commerce. There's lots and lots of, like there's the Greater Cincinnati USA Chamber, but there's all kinds of smaller chambers like the African American Chamber and the Hispanic Chamber and lots of chambers, but also just everyday people who think that it's wrong that when you go out to eat at a restaurant, back in the days when we did stuff like that, the person that was serving you was getting paid, $2.35 an hour. That's criminal to me. And so I think, part of it is education, but the other part of it is people standing up and saying, this is not right. I don't feel like in my community that people should be, paid this low wage. The other thing I'll say that add to this, and Mona kind of touched on this earlier, was access to healthy food. I feel like, Kroger is based here in Cincinnati, but I think because of that, they kind of have a stranglehold on food access. Probably gonna get in trouble for saying that, but I feel like that's true. And so we have so many communities where Kroger has chosen to leave, and therefore people don't have access to healthy food. And again, if you don't have access to healthy food close to your house and you're relying on taking the bus, multiple buses, transfers, and so forth, that limits your ability to bring healthy food into your house for your family. And again, that's another situation that it's costing you more money. Taking buses, going to convenience stores, those kinds of things. And, for whatever reason, we continue to sort of put up with it in Cincinnati. And this is a personal thing. It kind of just drives me bonkers. I feel like, we're supporting a market in Lower Price Hill called Miser's Market, Miser's Fresh Grocery. Thank you. So we renovated a building down in Lower Price Hill that had been a convenience store, and it was like the only store. It's kind of more like a small grocery. We got some money from the city. We've done a full renovation for the building, found a grocery tenant. She created a nonprofit. She quit her job for like a year and a half to create this place. Yes, and it's gonna be amazing. We're very close to opening. We're so excited. And this has been a partnership with us and Reba Hennessy of Your Store, the Queen City. And this is gonna provide a grocery store, a nonprofit model grocery store for Lower Price Hill. Again, we feel like this is a scalable model for other neighborhoods. But this is going to change lives in Lower Price Hill. It's a very geographically isolated neighborhood. Once it opens, we need everybody else to come spend your money there too. Like, wouldn't you rather spend your money and it's a social enterprise basically, yes, knowing that you're going to be paying it back to other people versus whoever makes money from Kroger's. I don't know who that is, but sure. But I feel like all of these things are intertwined.
Right, but that's the beauty of that model, right? Is that you're returning the profits and the resources back to the community. which makes it more equitable from its start. Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead, Mona.
piggyback off?
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
actually working with Reba on that because we're working on
Can we-
Clean Mothers Market Cooperative in Walnut Hills. So it's
That's
not only
right.
about housing, but it
Yes.
is providing those basic needs of food and housing. And then when you have that, a child can learn. Because the average child who is experiencing homelessness is 9 years old. The average person, right? Back in the 70s, it was a white male who just got home from Vietnam, a veteran. Now it has shifted to a 9-year-old child, black or brown child. Again, this race, right? So when we're building a coalition, we have to develop tactics and strategies for the overall goal and be mindful of who we are serving. So we are, again, and I said in the beginning that it's my responsibility. It's really ours. So I'm going to introduce y'all. It's all of ours. It's all of our responsibilities, right? To ensure that our brothers and sisters have food, to ensure that our brothers and sisters have livable wages to afford that food, to afford that housing. And when we have that combination, when folks have that, they are dynamic. We move from just surviving to thriving. And that's what everyone should be able to have. So when we realize this, we have to look at our roles, right? So what is the corporation's role, right? As you mentioned Kroger. What is Kroger's responsibility within this, especially being headquartered here? What are the other Fortune 500 companies that are here? What is their responsibility? So many are searching for talent outside of the city. We have so much talent right here, homegrown. It's just about supporting and building.
Yeah. I mean, and what's super ironic about responsibility is that every corporation has some social corporate responsibility arm, and you have to ask yourself, right? Like, who are you beholden to? Are you beholden to the shareholders, or are you beholden to your community, right? And I think that's a really critical example of the inequity and even who gets the attention, who gets the time. Did you have something to add to the coalition building?
Yeah, I think it's important to, draw these models out and hold them up as, for what they are. Home is a fair housing organization. We look at, what would be, we get people who come to our office who are experiencing unfairness in their housing. And so when we look through these cases and we see what's, in front of us and we look at our case sheets, we hear the need for what Rachel's doing, what Mona's doing, to be scaled up exponentially. And the fact that corporate developers and corporate entities within this city are not paying their fair share in taxes to support this community that supports them. And so when you look at things like tax abatements, tax fairness, it raises the question, what is the responsibility of elected leaders to ensure that when entities come to this community with their profit model and their margins, that they're not running roughshod over everyone else here to make those? And how do we as a community hold our elected officials responsible? Our candidates have to be educated and reminded of their responsibility. And then also these corporate entities have to understand that there is a fair share for doing business within this community. It can be everything from, creating communities with amenities around healthcare, food, wealth development, education, employment, transportation, all the things that build thriving communities. And businesses who come here to do business, or businesses who have been here to do business, or businesses that have made, millennial profits, not just annual profits, we're talking about millennial profits, should be held accountable to the communities that they are allowed to thrive in. It's our tax dollars that are keeping bandits from roaming the streets and keeping the roads paved and keeping the lights on and keeping the water going, that allow these businesses to grow and develop the way they have. So holding them accountable is key, and I think we do that through our elected officials. We're in an election year. I've called everyone I can. I've called in every space I can to tell people to question candidates about their plan for fair and affordable housing. What is their plan? What are we going to do to make taxes more fair? What are we going to do to make sure that programs and initiatives like the ones that are described here are multiplied, throughout the community? Some are going to do great, like Rachel's have, and some are going to fail. But that's the risk of doing the right thing and making sure, we're going to have to fix this and work this around. We're going to roll it out again. Not just it has to be perfect. It has to do. No, the idea is that you do it until you get it right, until there's equity, and people are allowed to thrive in the way that they should.
And for time, Janiece, thank you. You just everybody here just dropped all the gems. We're getting a whole scholarly lesson here. And I see my friend Carol back there. Are you taking notes? Like, she's like taking notes, like, yes. So it strikes me, you mentioned this a couple weeks ago when we were on our planning call, and you said, at the end of the day, you need the political will to be able to make the right decision. And there's part of that. And we need the political will to upend what is very plainly patronage to power. So when are we going to shift the dynamic from patronage to power to patronage to people? Because we are the decision makers, because it's our dollars at the end of the day. Thank you. You just brought it all home for us. So there's another element of this, which is just fascinating. Earlier today, with my consulate friends, Sulin No, who is live tweeting remotely, Megan Trishler, JP Young, we were texting on our group text, getting ready for tonight, and Claire Nelson, who is a co-founder of Urban Consulate, sends us a tweet from a good consulate friend, Andre Perry, from the Brookings Institute, and tells a story of a black family, oh my goodness, Erica and Aaron Parker. Did you read about this? A Loveland family. And I want to set it up in this way, because we're talking about affordable housing now, but when you add the racial element, you can have your house. But even when you have your house, the value of your house can be often predicated on your race. And so there was an article in the Inquirer about the Parker family and they encountered something we hear all the time. My house was valuated $150,000 less when I got it valuated, and we were presented as a black family, but when you invisibilized your race, suddenly your house is $150,000 more. And so this is like a stark condition, and painful to recognize that even black folk, people of color who are privileged enough to own a house, can't even reap the full value of that house because they're being racially discriminated against. I can't, it's just too much. And so as you think about this spectrum, on one hand, those who are unhoused, isolated from resources. On the other hand, those who have homes. But then you add the intersectionality of being a person of color. It's like racism exists at every stopping point along that journey. How can we begin to tackle that issue? And anyone can chime in on that, because that's a whole different ball of wax.
Well, that's a fair housing case.
Yes.
That was not unknown to Home before it made the media. We say that very general legally term, not unknown to us in terms of the situation, because we had gotten notice from our fair housing colleagues in Virginia and Indiana about similar cases. Before, so we get these bulletins like, hey, be on the lookout for, these disparate, appraisals, have your ear to the ground. These things are happening in certain neighborhoods. But that is a garden variety fair housing violation. I mean, it's the way it's described in the media. Let's say allegedly. So when you look at, you had a house, you had a dwelling. Allegedly, you had a dwelling, you had a housing transaction, you had a protected class, and you do have remedies. And so my hope for this family is that they are able to get remedies, and this is something that we look for in terms of appraisals on both ends. We've seen recently, I wrote an op-ed a couple weeks ago about the disparate tax levels and appraisals in terms of essentially people in Oakley and some of the higher end white neighborhoods versus black neighborhoods essentially paying the same tax. Hugely regressive, big old L-shaped line of regression. So back in the day, they called a black tax. And we're seeing these black taxes creep up and pop up, all over our markets. Whereas when we started, it was very overt, very, conspicuous. Our testers would, be shocked, that someone, well, of course we can't rent to any more blacks here. We are at our quota. Now those types of admissions don't typically happen. It's these covert, insidious things that kind of worm their way into our markets. So we have to make housing affordable. We have to even the playing field. So sometimes if that person maybe be a little racist, they see the green. They know it's not going to work that out for me that well to try to discriminate today, because this market is fair. This market has opportunities for different types of people. So even though I might not like it, I'm gonna get this money and keep it moving. I don't like it. If you don't have that affordable lever that scrunches the ability to cause the market to actually work the way it's supposed to. And so that's kind of my thinking on a lot of that. As these issues continue to evolve and we continue to look at it, we continue to get complaints and questions to our office about cases like that one.
Right. Well, I don't know, it's just like on the case. Home is on the case, literally. So thank you for the incredible service that you're providing for our city and for people. And there's a little bit of what do you call it, schadenfreude, when you're like, when somebody needs their comeuppance and then they get it, you're like, see, you should have never done that in the first place. So that's what I think about the work that you do, is making sure that justice is served for people who deserve it. So thank you. Very motivating. So we've got, this sort of larger, again, economic context that we are working within. And I talked a little bit earlier about, we live in this, it's an exceptionally inequitable capitalist system. That whole capitalist paradigm was never really meant to be equitable anyway. And the system is not broken. We know this. It was built and designed to be inequitable. And so as you think about the disruptive elements and the intersection of these great ideas that are emerging with policy at the local, state, federal level, what do you see as the next phase of systemic change? And I'm not even thinking so much about programs like eviction moratoriums, right? Because that's a Band-Aid program when you think about it. What do you see as like the next frontier of like the New Deal type systemic change? Yes.
I'll gladly take this. So, democracy. There is power in the people. We can have all of these policy changes, but if we don't hold folks accountable to those policy changes that sometimes get rewritten when the next group of folks comes in, we, the people, have to demand collectively that we have a right to housing, that we have a right to fair wages, that we have a right to be treated fairly, regardless of our race, regardless of our religious beliefs, regardless of our sexual orientation, regardless of our abilities. And we are in the process of trying to change 400, 500, I say 400 years ago, some of my ancestors came in a boat. 500 years ago, some of my ancestors were already here. So my ancestors' land was stolen. My ancestors provided free labor. And a part of us should be angry about that. Angry. Because where are we now? So we're going to have to take some bold moves in order to change that historical, what has led up to now. That historical oppression, that hurt, that trauma, because it's both a physical trauma and a mental trauma. So going forward, we can take that back. And one way is through asking questions. So the Peaslee Neighborhood Center came up with a rubric, which is a document that when a developer comes to their neighborhood, and it's used in a couple of neighborhoods right now. Hey, developer, what are you building? Because this playground over here, where the kids play, it's their asset. You want to take this down in order to build apartments that are $1,000 for a studio? No, this is of value to the neighborhood. So it asks questions of, what are you doing? What are you going to contribute to the neighborhood? Are you hiring at livable wages? And it also tells the city, hey, our neighborhood, this project's okay, or this project's not okay, and we expect you to listen to what the people are saying and are needing in their neighborhoods. And if not, you'll have to deal with those consequences. Because when people cannot work, they can't contribute. You want us to contribute to society, but you're not providing us with those resources. And we're telling you how we can get to that point, and you're still ignoring us. So the Homeless Coalition, the people, it is their voice that we have to listen to. We all have, if we're in a position, we are a megaphone of that voice. And it is the people that really run this and have the power to make these changes.
Well, I want to dig into that a little deeper, because one thing, learning is an action item. So I don't want to diminish the power of learning about how we can help. If you were each to give us one call to action, what is something that we could each do starting tomorrow? Because it's 8 o'clock and I don't know if we're going to be signing up tonight. But what is something we could do tomorrow at 6:30 in the morning to contribute to the more affordable housing and equity in the housing space in general here in our own city?
Well, we've kind of touched on this, but voting, and it's not just about voting in elections, it's about voting with every action that you take, right? So where you choose to spend your money, where you choose to grocery shop, all of those kinds of things. I mean, those are important. Where you borrow books from, how you kind of live your life. I mean, those things, the individual becomes the community. How we raise our children. I mean, there's so many decisions that are made on an individual and family basis that then can affect the broader community. And then also accountability. I mean, we've talked about accountability from the city's perspective, but as a nonprofit, the amount of paperwork, administration, accountability, et cetera, that we have to go through to get a little bit of money from the city to do something good in the neighborhood that residents want is absolutely insane. I mean, I work with, for-profit developers sometimes who are just like, what, you have to do what now? You have to do, they're just like blown away. But that's what we need to do in order to try to create good things in the community. And so there's an imbalance in the accountability, and that those of us that are trying to do good things, you're beg, borrowing, and stealing sometimes to make these good things happen. And then other folks with more access to funds and political will and so forth can, not exactly get off without any accountability. But it's a much different sort of playing field. So, and that's really frustrating. I think about that sometimes, when I'm working on my latest report to a funder or something, account audit or something like that. I'm like, the amount of scrutiny that we have to go through, and then there's a whole other world of for-profits that don't have to go through that, and
Right.
that's wrong.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it's not just folks like us isolated, but it's like institutions doing good work who are isolated from these big contracts. You have a 70-page RFP to reply to to do something for the community, and then you got to report on impact. I mean, that's time and labor. It's intense. And to learn that there's disparate treatment as it relates to for-profit entities is that's troubling. So here's where I want to kind of begin to close us out, because I think we may have people in the audience who may have questions. I hope you do. And we may have those in the audience who are posing questions as well. But what gives you a signal of hope in your work that not just you'll be leaving a legacy behind of having contributed to a better place, a better city, but that our children, our loved ones, and their children, and their loved ones will inherit a more equitable world? What's giving you hope that that is something that we can see, even if it's in the far off distance?
For me, I think social media is a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. And I think more recently, with so many postings of police brutality issues, the uprising that happened during George Floyd, and not only highlighted police brutality, but also other issues. And I think something clicked, along with the pandemic, something clicked that something's not right, and we need to change, and people are starting to plug in to figure out, what can I do to contribute? How can I end police brutality? How can I end homelessness? How can I do these things within a community? And people are trying to plug in. And these Zoom meetings that are happening so often, it's great, right? Because people can sit at home in their underwear and watch and learn. Right? Do we not want to sit at home in the comfortable, maybe have a glass of wine?
Your nice pink fuzzy slippers.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so there's been so many opportunities, and I'm so happy. One of the places that I learned, one of the things people can do is start plugging into their community council. Miss Catherine was the one who pulled me in and said, hey, you're new to the neighborhood, you need to start coming to the meetings. And when I first started going to the meetings, I was always the one, hey, let me ask this question. And I think people were like, who is this crazy woman? But then what started happening was where people were like, hey, what's the AMI on this? And so seeing that, and now I sit back and I'm not the one who's got the loud voice in the room
That's
anymore.
right.
It's the people.
Right.
Because now things are clicking where they want to not only see how things are affecting themselves, but their neighbors. Because they don't want to lose their neighbors.
Yes.
They don't want to see the children move out of the community.
Yeah.
They don't want to see our elders getting pushed out.
Right.
Long-time residents, right? And whether you're there for a year or longer or 40 years, it's still a community.
Yeah.
And that's what people now are seeing again, is like that sense of community. One of those things we don't normally see, right? It's in the back side of our mind that just happens naturally. The fact that we are losing it with this housing crisis, they want it back again.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That gives me hope. Janiece?
So one of the things I think that gives me hope is just, sitting in this library and all these beautiful books that I'm just like, keep staring at longingly, is that, not to know history for history's sake, but to know history in the sense that, we are, Black and brown people that are primarily toiling under this, unfairness today are the descendants of the greatest Afrofuturists that ever lived. But they lived hundreds of years ago because they saw our freedom, our elevation. They saw it when there was no evidence to call upon to say that it could happen. They didn't, they're dust now, but they're also with us. So we have to know that it's possible to address this, to move past this, to improve this, because the greatest improvements that have ever happened have already happened to us. Because we're here, we survived. Our ancestors survived. So I think, it becomes our time at some point to think about how do we become a good ancestor while we're alive. And what we want to give forward, so 150 years from now, our future generations will say, well, they rolled up their sleeves and they did, well, they didn't do as much as they did back in slavery times, but they did something, and they carried us forward. And they didn't allow these inequities to stand. So I think knowing that, ultimately your role in this life is to become a good ancestor and to keep that as your core pushing forward.
Well, Janiece is going to make me start crying now. But I think about, so my family is Jewish. And for me, it's mostly been about sort of culture versus religion, mostly because I grew up in Wheaton, Illinois, which is like the home of the Billy Graham Center, and I was like the only Jewish kid in my school for all of my growing up, well, my sister and I. But Yom Kippur is coming up in a day and a half, which is the Day of Atonement, and it's a chance to, as the new year is starting, a chance to sort of reflect upon errors and sins, but also sort of where you're going as a person and as a community. And I think in some way, perhaps COVID has been our sort of era of atonement, a chance for folks to kind of like scale back from some of the sort of craziness of the sort of usual world and to sort of reconsider priorities and assess where we want to go moving forward and where we want to put our energy. And so I like to sort of think of that sort of like cleansing, thoughtfulness and new spirit and moving forward, and how that can, be lead us into a brave new world. And I also think about, in Jewish culture, and I think in a lot of cultures, because Jews have been pushed all around the globe for millennia, like a lot of people. Education is the most important thing. Like, I remember my dad saying to me over and over again, I see people nodding, so I think other parents said this to them too. Nobody can take away your education. They can take away everything else about your life, but nobody can take away education. And so, sitting in this beautiful library, kind of thinking about that and thinking about how that is critical to, continuing to educate yourself and your community and your kids, that is how we move forward. So this opportunity to kind of take a deep breath, atone, and move forward. I think that gives me hope. It's not fun, it's not easy, but I think it's necessary.
What an absolute, it's a sobering conversation, but getting to share the space with you, having that conversation has just been, you bring a lot of enthusiasm to your work, and you're doing incredible things to contribute and work toward justice and equitable housing. So I want to thank each of the three of you. So excellent. So now is a time for us to engage with everybody here. We're going to do something that we haven't really done in some time, which is like live breakout tables. So for those who are joining us online, for those who've joined us online previously, our practice has been to have breakout rooms where we're in a more intimate group, we can really share. So we're going to do that in person now. And my colleague Megan Trischler is going to come back to the stage and instruct us as to what comes next.
Can you guys hear me in this thing? Does this work, JP?
Can you guys hear me okay? Oh, there it goes. First of all, thank you to each of you for and Naima as well, for a very moving and inspiring conversation. Oh, I'm getting the instruction, lift box, okay. Because we're such a small group tonight, I want to do this a little bit differently. In the past, we've gone into small dialogues, but I think with this size, I'd love to just keep us seated here and really just sort of turn it around and turn the conversation around to each of us sitting in the audience. And so I want to just invite first just a little bit of reflection on the following question. And it's this: what's something that you heard tonight that moved you, maybe stirred in you in some way? Maybe it surprised you in some way, perhaps challenged you in some way, or motivated you in some way? So what's something that you heard tonight that moved you, challenged you, motivated you, or perhaps surprised you? So I want to just give us a few moments just to reflect on that, and then we're gonna share. That sound okay? All right, so let's just take a moment. And as you feel led, if you'd like to share, I think I'm going to hand you the box. I think that's how this works. Is that right, JP? I'm going to toss the box. Okay. So don't be shy. I know we're a small group. It can be kind of vulnerable conversation, but we'd love to hear what's stirring inside of you as you listen tonight.
A couple things that really struck me. One was, Mona, when you spoke about the average age of someone who does not have a home right now, being 9 years old, and thinking about our highly ranked children's hospital and the disconnect in that sort of thinking about our community and our city, and sort of why that disconnect persists and has persisted for so long with so much money in play, and how that can still be the reality that we see in our community, and really thinking again about affordable housing for whom, as Catherine so brilliantly kind of framed the whole evening.
Very good. What else? What else is bubbling? Yeah.
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Antoine. I arrived late, and I am sorry. But what stirred me was I wanted to be a purveyor of affordable housing for the people. I don't know if I can accomplish 40,000 units, but I would like to make a dent on that number to bring it down a little bit through my career.
Wonderful.
So I cry a lot. Thank you for everything you do. I left the real estate industry, specifically real estate lending, in 2001 because of the practices that were so obviously predatory, and I could not sleep at night doing that kind of work. I am so sorry that we left you with such a mess. But I am so grateful that you have all stood up and decided to fight this bullshit, because it's been bullshit for decades. And it doesn't surprise me that it is women who are leading the way to fix a problem that many men caused. Sorry. Thank you.
I don't need a box. That surprised me. That surprised me. That's the only thing that surprised me tonight. Everything else that the ladies have said, I've heard over and over again in my lifetime. And there has been little change. There have been minute changes for decades, as I
I'm gonna bring you this.
say. Okay? I don't know how to fix it. I've been watching it. It's happened to me over and over again. I've watched gentrification happen in several different states. I'm watching it happen in my neighborhood. Even before it happened, I made mention to my wife that it was going to happen. We watched it happen, and we still weren't prepared for what we needed to do. So, knowing that it's going to happen, watching it happen, and knowing that there are no resources or very few resources available, and sometimes no resources available to the people that are being affected by it, it's deplorable. This is the United States of America. I don't understand why it continues to happen, other than the fact that it's a system designed to work, and it does. And people in the 20th century are still not prepared to battle it effectively. It's nice that the ladies and everyone in this room probably are feeling the same way, but you have to go outside this. It's the people that aren't here that need to understand what's going on and need to take action in their own homes and communities. And that's not to say that they aren't. There are people everywhere in this city that are acting and working and voicing their opinions. The main thing I see is that I was impressed when you said that there was, that you were actually having some effect in Price Hill, that you had something in line that would actually help people. Most people that need the help aren't getting it because they're asking questions, they're not getting the right answers, they're not asking the right questions, therefore they're not getting the right resources, and the resources really aren't available to them, so I don't want to get, so that's the point I want to make. Resources are not made available to the people that need them, and the people that really need to understand what's going on are feeling as though they're not affected, or they're being affected but feel as though there's no recourse. Okay? This has been going on, as you say, for decades, and people know that it's going on. Still, here we are today.
There really has to be boldness to back up what you're saying. Completely agree. There has to be boldness, intentionality, and a removal of barriers. Looking at the rent moratorium, part of the issue why some of that money was not getting to folks is because you had to fill out an application online. How many people have access to a computer? How many have access to a computer, know how to use the computer? How many folks were available to answer questions regarding that application? Because a lot of folks, businesses were closed, folks were laid off, things of that sort. So you look at those barriers that started adding up that put people in a further bind. Now that the rent moratorium has lifted, and there's still this money out there, which we know it's still out there because there were barriers, give it to the landlords. Make it easier. Do not put up. People are losing their housing over a barrier. A barrier. Which makes me think that you intentionally put this barrier up there so that you wouldn't get it. Get rid of it. And right, be bold, and it's going to take those of us who have privilege to use that privilege for the rest of us.
I I actually had a question because you talked about how important it is to be active in community councils, and I 100% agree. And then I think about the people who don't have the privilege to be able to attend those meetings, and I wonder if there's, first of all, do y'all endorse candidates, which probably is a double-edged sword because you probably can't do that, but at the same time, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if all the people that candidates could go and be homeschooled and go to like homeschool, and they could all learn from you like we've learned tonight, because there are so many of these realities. We have what, like 500 people running for Cincinnati City Council this time, and how do we even know and could get into a forum to be able to ask them what their policies are on affordable housing? And it seems like this should be part of like onboarding for city council. Like, you get into the job, great, now you actually have to go to school because there are things that are important about the city you can't know any other way. So would something like that be of value? Is there something we could advocate for that would help the people once they get into those positions maybe be more accountable based on real information and the experts who exist in the community like you all?
I think it would be really useful for any city council candidate or just residents to sort of like follow a day in a life of a typical city employee and a typical resident and a typical, nonprofit employee and so forth. I mean, just to see like the inefficiencies and inequities, and to try to find ways to improve the system. There's been a lot of talk over the last several years in like I'm looking at DJ, design thinking and trying to improve the way systems work. And I think some organizations locally have really taken advantage of that. I don't think I've seen it so far like at the government level, and I would think that could be very useful. I think there are some, like Action Tank has some really great programming, and they're doing some good work around city council candidates and education for voters. And a way to get that information into the hands of more people would be really useful, I think.
That was actually my question, is how do we get organizations such as yours in contact with the other organizations that we know of, like Action Tank, so that your power is amplified and you can, because we're not at odds. We're all looking for the same better future. It's just that we feel like we're pulling from a small pond when actually it's this huge ocean. We just have to go at it together. So how do we do that? How do we get you in contact with the other places that we know?
So I'm going to mention Cincinnati Action for Housing Now actually has a candidates forum on September 23rd and September 24th, since there's so many candidates. Homeless Coalition is a part of that as well. And Home is a part of it. Affordable Housing Advocates is a part of it. A number of churches, a number of other organizations, NAACP, Urban League. So we are forming that coalition that we kind of talked about before. So we're asking for folks, if you have questions for these candidates regarding housing, to submit them, right? We're going door to door to ask folks, because we realize not everyone, the digital divide, has access. Trying to be more inclusive in talking to folks to find out how can we serve them to make these processes more accessible to them. So that's my, suggestion is
Literally sat next to one of the women who served Action Tank last week at dinner, and I would love to have been in and say, I have these 5 business cards. These are people that you need to make sure you get your questions from. And I see that as a deficit that we have in this city of understanding who's playing in which field, and that they're all in the same backyard.
Mona, can you say the dates again for the?
September 23rd
Okay.
and 24th.
Thank you.
I can't think of the time offhand. It's probably 6 o'clock. Usually that's what we do.
Thank you.
But, and to your point, it's almost like when I was studying business, it's called the Six Sigma process, right?
Yes.
Where you're basically, okay, I don't answer labor questions. I go to the Interfaith Worker Center when I have questions about labor. I go to home when I ask questions about the legalese and legal aid regarding housing. I know who are the experts. You're right, it is about how can we make sure that folks know who are the experts in these areas. That might be something to do, to work on.
That might exist.
Yeah, and I would just say to that, you know, and this is kind of me thinking back a bit in terms of my legal practice, you know, when I was in practice, in terms of, you know, when you come to negotiate, you got to have leverage. And so sometimes figuring out what this particular elected candidate wants or needs in order to be successful can sometimes be used as a lever to get some things that you want, we want. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with taking inventory of individuals' wants and needs and political aspirations and making sure that it's clear that we're in negotiations and we are sitting across the table from each other, you know, in terms of we're going to need these things around fair and affordable housing, and you're going to need these things around development, fundraising, all the things in order to be successful long term. So I think that that's a community organizing piece that could probably have more legs to it in terms of really getting at people, you know, really being so, I said, you know, I always get into this transactional mode. I always, you know, to being a little bit more transactional and figuring out what the leverage is and using it. And it's a lot of it's just, you know, listening. What do you want? What do you want? You know, what will make you happy? What can we do to work together? You know, and it's transactional, but deals are made that way. And so you make peace and make deals. You know, you make peace and make deals not necessarily with your friends. You make peace and make deals with people that where there's a mutual appreciation of what you can do to assist each other in your goals and objectives.
And one of those things that you want to know is that deal, is their word on that deal bond? Mm-hmm. That's why city cable exists. Mm-hmm. Because some of the current candidates, you can go back and look at what was their track record when it came down to affordable housing issues. Mm-hmm. So now, all of a sudden, when we're up on an election, am I going to believe that you're really going for affordable housing? When you've been voted for the last 2 years against everything that has come up? Don't know how we're going to evaluate the new candidates, but I mean, you know, that's at least something that's giving us a little bit more of that leverage that can be used.
I would also say it's not just our elected candidates when we talk about affordable for whom, but it's also city staff. Because the city staff members have great influence and impact on legislation that goes through, projects that go through. They are in many ways a gatekeeper to development deals in community, and having a relationship with them and knowing their schedules, and there is, you know, the planning, they meet every other week, whereas they need be, that is important to know what's going on in that regard.
Anyone else? I want to make sure if anyone didn't get a chance to speak that might want to speak in terms of a challenge or a. Can I hand this back to you?
Thank you. I was most curious about this Peaslee rubric. I think the thing that I see is that neighborhoods are responding to things that are happening elsewhere when capital enters or when they're trying to get capital to enter. And this rubric, it just sounds like it's like a self-determination, like the community gets to decide what they want. And so I was curious if you could talk more about like how that came together and how it's being used and if it's been successful.
Sure. It actually came about after the basketball courts located at Main and Schiller were being threatened. And so community members like Peaslee, at that time Black Lives Matter Cincinnati, which I was leading, we formed a coalition, and the kids, again, it was their voice, the kids said that this is a valuable asset to us. They wanted to keep those courts. So it was the Keep Our Courts campaign that started. When kids get out of Rothenberg, a lot of times they go play on that playground because maybe their parents are still working. So then the community members watch these children. Hence, it's a community asset. Being threatened for workforce housing that was being built where, again, it would have been 1-bedroom units for $900. And so instead of being reactive, because that campaign was to force Northland out, basically that's what happened. Finally, the community made such noise that the developer said, you know what, I'm not even going to touch it. So Peaslee said, okay, instead of us being reactive, let's be proactive, and came up with that rubric that communities can use to say, hey, let's start asking these questions about community footprint. Let's start asking these questions about labor, there's various other topics, and you can actually find it on the CAN website, which is Communities Act Now, which talks about tax abatements. So it's actually Peaslee Homeless Coalition, where we're talking about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but also tenant rights, and the Teachers Union, where they're talking about how these tax abatements, like our schools are not even properly, it's illegal how they're funded, and a lot of us don't even know that. So this tax abatement money our schools are losing it. And it's also on the Peaslee website, so you can go in and learn more. And then there's a meeting every first Thursday at 6 through Peaslee if you want to get involved and learn more about that.
What I think is great about the Peaslee rubric is that, again, it's proactive, but also, other community councils in Cincinnati are taking advantage of that, using that as a starting point to determine, how they want that to work in their neighborhood. So in Lower Price Hill, we had a conversation at the community council and as a neighborhood action team about, okay, we have this Lower Price Hill Thrives project, which is led by Community Matters and Over the Rhine Community Housing, which is providing a lot of affordable housing in the neighborhood, both some new construction, handicapped accessible units, and some renovating existing buildings. We know that that's a project we want. Let's put it through the rubric and see how it scores. Like, with this project that we know we want scored high enough to get approval, or are there things that we need to tweak in this model to make it fit our neighborhood, which is, Lower Price Hill is very dense, very historic. So, there's different sort of facets in different neighborhoods. So I love it as a kind of a starting point, and then using it to sort of tweak for, your neighborhood conditions and population and so forth. So it's a great tool, I think.
Yay. Well, I'm mindful of time and want to, there it is. Kick it back to Naima to close us. But I just wanted to say one other thing, and I'm just reminded of what our mentor and friend, Ms. Eileen Cooper-Reed, has said before. And she is one, of course, who's done advocacy work in DC and around the country. Eileen said to us a couple years ago that the nation is where you are, and change starts where you are. And so just to appreciate, I think it was Mona's comment that talked about looking at the city, looking at our community and our neighbors as brothers and sisters. And each of us, we operate in different domains, we have different passions and different gifts, and there's a role and a responsibility to play. So I just want to kind of ground us in that reality too, that this is an insurmountable, seemingly topic, and yet there is something that each of us can leave here tonight with one action step, and we got a few great ideas. One thing that we can do starting at 6:30 a.m. tomorrow.
Yes.
All right, back
Not
to you.
6:29, not 6:31, 6:30. So once again, thank you, everyone. I want to encourage everybody here and those of you joining us online. We're going to be right back here I like calling it the Merc. It just sounds cooler. We're going to be back here at the Mercantile Library on October 11th. So please come back. And the topic is amazing because we're going to be joined by three extraordinary guests: Elisa Yancey, Dr. Robin Martin of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Vian Barnett of the Union Institute and Cincinnati Union Bethel. And we're going to be talking about an extraordinary topic, and that is the science of change and understanding. And in a world marked by, a desperate need for change and understanding, this will be a topic that you won't want to miss. Join us here. We'll be online and we'll be here at the Mercantile. Also, please save the date. We are here every second Monday. So that's October 11th. It's my baby girl's birthday. She's going to be 10, y'all! October 11th, sorry. It's way too excited. I think that's also like November the 8th and December 13th. We'll be back here. So please join us. In November, we're talking about equity in education, which happens to also coincide with the latest release of Urban Consulate Presents, our partnership with CET, Public TV. In December, we'll be talking about collective community care, where we'll have some extraordinary healers and caretakers and wellness bringers talk to us about what it means to care for ourselves, but surround ourselves with people who allow us to care for us as well, right? Community care. And as always, these dialogues are free and open to the public. All ages are welcome, right? And the library always follows CDC guidelines. You can see we are all masked on the stage and socially distanced. And so you can come to consulate salons feeling safe and feeling like people have your safety in mind. Invite a friend. It's quite fun, right? We kind of hang and we kind of chill and we learn together and we grow together. It's wonderful. Want to also encourage you to follow us, if you do so, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I think we're also getting a YouTube channel, so you'll always be able to dial in to Urban Consulate programs. Thanks once again, everybody. Until next time, have a good night.